What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and welcome to another miniature rescue. Today I'm going to fix up an old Forgeworld model, and we really need to talk about recasting in Warhammer 40k. A while back, I was gifted a pretty busted up Sonic Dreadnought by a subscriber. It's been sitting in a drawer for a pretty long time because I've been looking for a good way to bring it back to life. Looking for parts and pieces for an out-of-print item can be a little tricky. I scoured eBay for Venerable Dreadnought parts, and while I did find some for certain factions, I really couldn't find anything for the Emperor's Children. The thing is, this particular model features some pretty unique add-ons and armor that make it very specific to the Emperor's Children army for Warhammer 40k. So I couldn't really use parts from something else to make that work. On the other hand, I did find plenty of parts for 3D printing that could technically work, but something about the files was just a little bit off. Either the parts weren't exactly right for the type of model, or they were designed as proxies for the real thing. So they looked like they fit the style, but weren't actually the same as the original bits. So of course, the road I was on eventually led me down a pretty dark path: recast models. Right off the bat, I don't condone recasting. I truly do understand the reasons why you would want to buy a recast model. Here we are talking about how I just did that very thing. But I honestly don't think it's a very good thing for the hobby, and it just ends up hurting the companies who are getting ripped off. Not even talking about Games Workshop, but smaller companies who don't have the margins to take a hit from a recasting outfit. Think of popular smaller one-person, small-person operations with limited edition models or busts. Yeah, it's not great. Okay, so minor rant aside, I did end up finding a model that I'm 99% sure is a recast. I did buy it on eBay knowing that it could be, and even though it didn't explicitly say that it was, which makes sense if you're trying to be shady and screw someone over, or you're hiding from lawyers. Even still, I got the model and it has the parts that I need to fix the real Sonic Dreadnought that I do have. The way I look at this is how you might see an old car. You go out and buy something fancy and you want the parts to match the year of your new fancy car. But oh no, you're missing something that will be impossible to find. It's not made anymore. So you get a fabricated version of that missing piece to complete your new old fancy car. That's the plan today. I'm going to clean up this model and salvage the parts that I can, and use a recast version to fill in the blanks. Hopefully, we will end up with a model that is mostly original and can be brought back to the tabletop again. The first thing we need to look at are all the parts and pieces of each model and determine what will have to be replaced and what we can keep. For the most part, the original model is still intact. The arms aren't attached currently, and one of the legs is broken, but the body is in alright shape. You can see that the head has been replaced and green stuff is filled in the cavity where the larger Dreadnought head is supposed to go. It's a pretty cool looking head swap, but since I'm aiming for a restoration of the original model and I happen to have the new head now, that'll have to be cut out and cleaned. The real bummer on this model is the speaker grill on the right side. It's been damaged, and I'm not sure if I can actually recover it. It's also in an area that I don't want to cut off, and it's a very large part of the model, so I'll do what I can to recover the detail. Either way, I want to keep as much of the original as I possibly can, so little things here and there that aren't quite perfect is alright by me. Before getting to any of the really tough bits, I want to try and get some of the excess old paint off the model. I'll be using a sonic cleaner filled with LA's Totally Awesome in order to lift off that old paint. Using an ultrasonic cleaner with resin can be a little annoying. If the vat heats up enough, it can warp the material and ruin the model even more. So I need to be pretty careful about the heat and run the model multiple times after the liquid is cooled down. On the upside, if you do end up with a piece of Forgeworld resin that comes bent, which you probably did, you can heat it up and bend it back into place. Once the model has gone through the sonic cleaner, I'll use a toothbrush to scrub away any excess paint. It cleans the model pretty well, and I see that for the most part the resin is in alright shape. It did take a bit of scrubbing to get the model cleaned up, but it's already starting to look a lot better and I'm getting pretty excited. The next step will be removing the plastic head. I don't want to damage the resin, so I start by seeing how stuck in it is. And man, it's really in there. The green stuff around it has got a good hold on the head, so I came in with my Dremel and started to bore a hole into the plastic. Once I got in there, I was able to use my hobby snippers to grab and clip out that part. Luckily, the green stuff was coming out in pretty large chunks, and it seems to have not adhered to the walls of the resin too much. Definitely enough to keep the head in there, but with a little prying and Dremel work, I was able to get it out and cleaned up. Okay, so here's the first big decision for the model. The left leg has broken off and needs to be reattached. Now that's not usually a huge deal. I can clean the joins and get them back together with super glue, but I'm noticing that there's some damage on the armor plate and the sculpted skull has been replaced with a plastic one and some green stuff. I think this leg is going to need to be replaced with a new one so we can get a more accurate look for both the legs without replacing the entire lower half of the model. I cut away the leg in the same place where the break occurred on the real one and sanded down each part so that they match up with the central section. I want the joints to be as flush as possible so that the super glue can really keep them together. Normally on these models there are little keystone pieces that match up piece to piece in order to join them together. This model has had all of those cut away and flattened. My guess is that there may have been some attempt to magnetize the model, but the idea was abandoned for the loadout that it currently has. So in order to get these parts to stick together, I'll need to drill pinholes in each joint before gluing them together. The next big piece of the model is the chainsword. Currently, it's actually missing. It's just gone. It's not there. But I can match up the pieces from the recast kit and know that it is in fact the same weapon option. Most of it is still there, just not the blade part. Since I don't want to rebuild the entire pauldron and arm assembly, I just cut away the blade at the rounded joint where the tubes meet. As long as I can sand these down to fit the curve of the elbow joint, that should glue on just fine and look pretty good. And I can keep most of the arm original. Now you might be wondering about the original model and whether or not it in itself, in fact, is an original Forgeworld resin model. It's hard to tell sometimes when you're dealing with almost perfect recasts, but there are usually a few ways that you can tell. If you look at the original model and compare it directly to this recast, you can see that there's some warping in the mold. The parts aren't a perfect replica, and the overall roundness of the real model and proportions tell me that it's not fake. This isn't a perfect way to know, but it's a strong indicator. There can also sometimes be extra mold lines where the recaster didn't line up the mold in the same way that the Forgeworld people did. But you don't always see it if they clean the model first. Another good way to know is by the color of the resin. Forgeworld tends to be an off-white gray, while recasts are often much lighter gray. Again, not always a good indicator, but this is usually a dead giveaway from the models that I've gotten to see. Resin colors do change, formulas change, so it's not guaranteed, but in my experience, this is usually true. Lastly, the excess resin flashing where the parts have been cut from the sprue. Forgeworld isn't always the best at this, but recasts are generally worse. Just look at the back of this torso. This is insane and would take forever to clean up and make look proper again. I've had some interesting offcuts of resin before, but recasts are almost always terrible like this. The originals tend to be better and this is less of an issue, so look for excess flashing. The only real way to tell is if you have the original book that came with the model and a receipt. So keep that in mind if you're buying Forgeworld kits off of eBay. It's easy to get fooled and it's not a great feeling when you end up with a counterfeit. Okay, so the model is looking pretty good. I'm going to cover the base with some texture basing and let that dry before priming the model black. As far as the color goes, I want to keep it pretty simple. This model has some flat panels with some really cool trim, so I'd like that detail to stand out. The only other model I've painted from this specific army was that newer plastic noise marine that came out a couple of years ago. One of my absolute favorite projects that I've done on this channel, and I got to collaborate with a friend. Ben from Schnitzy Basing made an epic base for me, and I painted the model like the box art pretty much. Today we aren't going quite that far, but if you want to see that video, then check it out right here. I'll start by pre-highlighting the model with some white ink, hitting the top of each shoulder, the face, and each armor panel. This will set the model up to get a filter of a nice transparent purple. The gradient from white to black turns a bright purple and fades to almost black. So each panel will stand out nicely, and once the trim is painted in, it should look pretty clean. I'll follow up on the purple by adding a good amount of fluorescent pink to the mix. I went over each of the panels and gave them a little burst of pink right on the corners and middle. Not too much pink, but it really livens up that armor and looks pretty nice. Next up, we'll be filling in the trim. I went with gold to start because a nice bright gold is a great color with purple and pink. Also go over smaller details with a bright silver to break it up a little bit and get some of that more unique trim detail to stand out. Keeping this relatively simple, I want to edge highlight any of the flat panels on the model. I mixed up some of that fluorescent pink with that purple, keeping in a little more of the pink to go brighter, and go over each panel. Weirdly, I thought there'd be more edges on this model, but really there's only a few due to the amount of trim, which honestly is fine by me. Once all of that is done, I want to bring in some definition and bring the colors together using a Tamiya panel liner. I love the way that this makes the paint look. With the gold and silver, it really gives them a clean, aged look, and it does a great job at blacklining the trim. I'll let that set up for a few minutes and come back to clean off the tops of the flat panels with a makeup sponge. That way we still have a nice black line in the recesses and maintain that bright color on top. This model has been sitting in a drawer for quite some time, and I'm super glad that I was finally able to get it out and complete it. There are still some quirks about the model and its condition, but using parts and pieces of a recast model, we were able to get it back onto the tabletop. And I feel like that justifies the whole project. Using recast models is something that I don't particularly enjoy. I mean, imagine if I just scrapped this model and painted just the recast. It doesn't really feel very good to me. Of course, I would love to hear your opinions about recasting down in the comments. I know it's not the same for everyone, and it's great to hear different perspectives. At the end of the day, this model has been restored to a playable condition, and it's something that I can add to my collection and still feel good about. Thank you again for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video. And of course, here is the completed Emperor's Children Venerable Sonic Dreadnought. Thanks, guys.